gość specjalny. Chciałbym, żebyśmy go gorąco powitali. Nikesh Arora jest naszym gościem. To jest prezydent Europe, Middle East, Africa Operation and Senior Vice President Google. Nikesh Arora.
Thank you.
Tsunami is coming from America, yes? You heard that.
Tsunami is coming from America?
Yeah.
I heard there's tremendous amounts of opportunity.
Okay, so the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I understand half your call is stuck in traffic jams or trying to get here. So the bad news is the room is half empty. The good news is you will be the only few people with select information on how to deal with all this crisis, right? Okay. Okay. Let's talk about what happens next. Where are we going to? Now, the challenge in speaking after somebody who has so eloquently talked about the crisis is, I can't talk about the crisis, right? He already stood here and showed us tremendous amounts of charts about what's going to happen. We've seen pictures of the crisis and discussions about the crisis all over the place. I was in Davos with our founder, Larry Page, and he was asked by a journalist, what do you think about the crisis? Now, for those of you who do not know Larry Page or who have not met Larry Page, Larry's not an economist, he's an engineer. Any engineers in the room? Anybody here who's an engineer who made a mistake before they came to media? No, okay, none of you, good. So he answered the question by saying, if you think about the economy from an engineer's perspective, nothing has changed. We still have the same number of people in the world. We still have the same amount of manufacturing material in the world, gold, copper, oil. We still have the same capabilities as individuals. Technology is continuing at the same pace. So in an engineering context, none of the constraints have changed. Nothing has changed. In fact, the prices of things have gone down. You can buy oil cheaper, you can buy lots of construction material cheaper. So why has suddenly the world gone from this way to this way? And his hypothesis, which is fascinating, is that what has changed is consumer sentiment. Suddenly all of us have become way more apprehensive, way more pessimistic. We're all thinking, well, maybe I won't buy the next car now, maybe I won't buy the new house. And suddenly as consumer optimism changes, it actually has an impact on the economy, because all of us don't want to spend money. If you don't want to spend money, it impacts companies, it impacts our ability to keep jobs. So his view, which is interesting, is the way to get out of this crisis is actually to find a way to start making consumers more optimistic. Because the engineering constraints have not changed. So let's see. So hopefully part of this exercise is try and see if all of you guys can go out there and create optimism in the minds of consumers. If you think about it, unfortunately, what this is doing to the advertising business. If you look at advertising around the world, the expectations are that advertising is going to decline. Surprise, surprise. Everything is declining. The economies are declining. I think for the first time, the world economy is supposed to grow only at 0.5% in 2009, first time in 60 years. And as we go through the year, it might be that the economy actually declines globally as opposed to goes up. So we have a situation where advertising is going to decline in 2009. If you look at where that decline is going to come from, these are figures by Zenith Optimedia, I'm sure all of you are aware of. I think they're too optimistic. I think they're expecting a decline in television by 1.6%. If I look at January, television is actually down between 10 to 15% in most major markets in Europe. If you look at France, the UK, it's down 10 to 15%. Another competitor thinks that television is going to be down about 8 to 10% this year. So life is going to look very different from a media perspective. There is one part of this which you can see is growing, is the internet, expected to grow at 12%. Maybe it doesn't grow at 12%, maybe it grows at 5%, maybe it grows at 2%. As somebody said the other day, flat is the new up. So if you can stay flat, it's a good thing. So if you look at this and see what's happening. Now, before this financial crisis came about, the one thing that was happening was we were going through some sort of a revolution in the media industry. Things were beginning to change in the media business around us. And all that this crisis has done, it has actually put both effects into the same basket. It's going to both happen at the same time. We have a media revolution going on. We have a financial crisis, which is sort of we're in the midst of. If you think there are about 7 billion, 6.5 billion people around the world, there are 1.4 billion people who are online around the world, right? That makes it the world's largest information, communication, and broadcasting network that has ever existed. That 1.4 billion represents over 85% of the world's GDP, right? If that was a country, it would be one of the most populous countries in the world, competing with India and China. So suddenly, where people were building goods and services for 100 million people or 40 million people in Poland, now you can actually build a good and service for 1.4 billion people because they are all connected to in the same way. If you look at the successes in the last 10 years, Google, MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Skype, all these are businesses which have actually been created to target the 1.4 billion consumers that exist on the internet. If you believe the 1.4 billion people are online, which you have to believe because they are, and you look at what else is happening around them, let me start at the top left. There is tremendous amounts of more interactivity and control in the hands of the consumers. For those of you who have children, they are actually way more technologically savvy and are able to interact with media a lot better than a lot of us can. You know, they're on YouTube, they're on MySpace, they're on Facebook, they're talking to each other, they're interacting. This is media. You know, Facebook and MySpace is another form of content creation. We call it user-generated content, which is slightly different from professionally generated content, but still, content is being created and consumers are interacting with that content, and they've taken over the control. So you're seeing tremendous amounts of interactivity and control. If you look at the notion of content explosion, how many of you, I'm sure all of you know about YouTube, right? How many of you have watched a video on the web in the last month? Some of you have. There we go, at least about 50% of you. In the UK, where I live, 80% of the people claim to watch one video a week, at least on the internet, right? 1 out of 5 have admitted to having watching a full-length television program or a full-length TV series on the internet. 15 hours of video is uploaded every minute on YouTube. 15 hours. If it makes you understand it better, equivalent to 86,000 movies being released every week by Hollywood. That's the amount of content that is being created by consumers and uploaded on a minute-by-minute basis, 15 hours of content. So there's a huge explosion on content. Suddenly, there's lots and lots of content. Now, what does that do for people in the media business? It increases the amount of fragmentation. It's very hard. You know, I remember I grew up in India, and I'm sure this is not untrue in Poland. 20 years ago, we had one channel, one television channel. Imagine the job of a media buyer in television. You want to buy media? Yes. I've got one channel. I've got 6 slots. Which one do you want? Right. Today, that problem is slightly more complicated. Right. Today, in the US, the top 5 channels account for only 31% of television spent in consumer viewing. In Europe, that number is still in the 70 to 80%. But as you look at the fragmentation, suddenly there is competition for TV, from YouTube, from MySpace, from online journalism, a whole bunch of stuff. So if you take all of this together, we are going to a world where consumers will take control. There's tremendous amounts of content, and there's tremendous amounts of fragmentation. Right? So where do we go? Where are we headed? If you look at, I'll give you 4 different examples. The first one, I think as we go forward, today we make a mistake. We think of online as a different medium from print, television, newspapers, and radio. I think as we go forward, it is very important to think about online as a way of distributing our content, whether it's created for TV, whether it's created for print, whether it's created for radio, whether it's created for magazines. Because anybody who's creating content is actually putting it on the web and using that just as another distribution mechanism. So online is not a different beast. It is actually part of the integrated content creation and content distribution strategy going forward. It is going to be more personalized and more participatory. The chairman of the BBC, Mark Thompson, said 3 years ago that we are 5 years away from fully individualized drag-and-drop TV and radio stations. If you think about that, today in the UK you can watch most television programming that you have missed. You can watch it on the internet, on the BBC's iPlayer, or you can watch it on the Sky Player. Right? So what is happening is I'm no longer bound that I have to watch this program on this channel at 9 p.m. on Friday, and if I miss it, life stuff, I just have to wait for the broadcasting gods to decide to let me see it again. It's not happening anymore. So as we go forward, it is not unlikely that consumers will design their own channels and design what they watch, which again feeds into the idea of fragmentation in the media. Hubert Burda said something as interesting, where he says, content alone can no longer win. There is an interesting thing, if you look at the sudden surge in television programming, which is user-managed, Big Brother, reality TV shows where consumers are sort of getting involved and getting engaged in the content. There's tremendous amounts of engagement. I will show you how an Israeli musician called Kutumanti decided. He went to YouTube, he took a whole bunch of different clips from YouTube and decided to create his own album. He didn't create any content, he just mixed it. He went to YouTube and found a whole amount of music at YouTube, took a whole bunch of videos and made it into an album and released it through friends. It has now a few million views a day, and he had only 3 guys who actually helped him. Let's see if it works. Very good.
Well, what can I do?
You could play that 16th note groove
Just straight.
going. You'll be amazed.
Okay. Do it again. All right.
We need more than one guitar part. There'll be
Okay.
somebody playing single notes, somebody playing chords, and they'll mix them together.
Okay. And let's just pick the mother of all funk chords. Let's pick a 9th chord.
Okay, well, again, the point of this video was this guy actually went to YouTube, saw all these videos, and made this himself. He just took different clips, re-edited it, made it into a CD, and he's now selling this as an album. He gave credit to all the people who were in here. The point I'm trying to make here is that these things have the tremendous capability of changing the way content is going to be discovered in the future and how we will find our next artist. It is no longer you have to wear a hat, go to a bar in America, and listen to all the people playing overnight and decide who your next star is. In the future, people will find the future content leaders, whether it's musicians, artists, etc., somewhere on the internet. At some point, if you follow the media industry, there was a very complicated structure in the past between talent agencies, producers, broadcasters, advertisers, and how talent was controlled and managed in the past. If you look at what's happening today, everybody can go on the internet and go and target the audience. Whether it's a 11-year-old girl singing, it's a 16-year-old girl, it's a 20-year-old guy, it's Kutumanti from Israel. Everybody has the opportunity of going and targeting the 1.4 billion people. Now what this means for us from a media perspective is, in the future we won't be just going to television stations and trying to find the content that we want to advertise on. We will have to figure out what the most popular form of content is and what the most popular way to get to that content is going to be. In the past, if you think about the way advertising has worked, we had television, print, and radio. Internet advertising came on the scene about 7 years ago. When Google started, you could buy one link for $15 at the top, $12 at the middle, $10 at the bottom. That's it. You could buy 3 links on Google for search advertising. In 2002, we decided to go into an auction mechanism, and we started auctioning these ads. Last year, Google made $20 billion in search advertising. I think the total market around the world is about $30 to $40 billion in search advertising, which begins to compete with print and begins to compete with radio in 2007 and 2008. At that time, search was only used as a direct marketing tool. So if you don't want to market in print, if you don't want to market on radio, you can do direct marketing on the web. What's beginning to happen, I think, is we're beginning to see different ways of advertising on the web which allow us to do brand-related advertising. If you look at the display mechanisms, if we're trialing things on YouTube where in the middle of a video you can show an ad, you can associate your ad with the video. So you're beginning to see branding type of advertising come on the internet. I think that is going to be the next big explosion in online advertising, where it begins to knock on the budgets of television, begins to knock on the budgets of brand advertising. And I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're likely to go to a phase where it is just going to become one part of the integrated campaign. And rather than try and explain how this works, let me try and show you what Sony did. Is anybody aware of the Sony Foam City campaign, which they just did? Yes? So they took basically a city block in Miami and started a foam machine which can fill up an Olympic pool in about 24 seconds. And then they gave recording equipment to 200 bloggers and amateurs and said, go ahead and design the best piece of content and ads that you can. They're using that content now as part of their online program, as part of their television programming, and they're constantly reusing it. They've changed the way they involve users, engage the users. They've changed the way they involve agencies. They've changed the way how they create the campaign. So online has become part of their whole strategy. Before this, they had the Bouncing Balls campaign, if you remember. And the Bouncing Balls campaign did not have any online engagement, online mechanism. This campaign is 40% online. Right, so let's see if this was one example. Here we go. This is a classical, traditional media campaign designed by users and where users have been engaged. So I think this is possibly where we could be going to if you think about how advertising is done. There is actually a website called openad.net where there are 11,000 media professionals who are available, and you can actually ask them to pitch an idea, and within 2 weeks they give you a pitch, and then you can choose amongst the different pitches which one you want to adapt to your campaign. Actually, agencies are beginning to use this as opposed to go out and spend 4 or 8 weeks trying to design a concept. They put the idea over there, and there are 11,000 professionals who thereafter react to it, whether they're individuals or agencies, and make pitches. So it's quite interesting to see how this comes out. So where are we going? I think you are going to see tremendous amounts of shifts towards internet distribution, because internet is basically a distribution platform. It is not something that is owned by Google or YouTube or MySpace or Facebook or Bebo. It is actually a platform where 1.4 billion people are connected, so it allows you for very quick and cheap distribution. We are going to see a lot more personalization in the media space. We are going to see the content supply chain open up. Content will be created by many, many, many different people out there. And last but not the least, I think you are going to see a new era of cross-media advertising. Now, what does that mean? What do we do? This is great information. What do we do as media agencies? What do we do as advertisers? What do we do as content creators? I think there are 4 big things I would like to make sure that I give you as parting messages. One has to get back to your core. It's very interesting. When I talk to lots of newspapers, and when I'm talking to newspapers, they feel somehow the internet is destroying their business, and they feel that newspapers are going to be in sequential decline because their content is free on the internet, their circulations are declining, not quite so the case in Poland just yet, but definitely in the US and the UK. And they're sitting there saying, how do we see this current scenario, both economic crisis as well as the advertising crisis? And the challenge is, if you go back and think, when we had no internet, every country had 4, 5, 6 newspapers. You had regional newspapers. There were 12,000 newspapers around the world, right? And people would come to a press conference. They would write articles. They would go back home and present them to their audiences in the different countries. Today, if you go to a press conference and you write an article, in about an hour, on any given topic, you can find 150 to 500 articles on the internet about that same issue. And as a consumer, I do not have appetite to read 500 articles on the internet. Maybe 2, maybe 3 on the same topic, but not 500. So the question becomes, now, has the internet distribution platform created an over-commoditization in certain areas of content and a huge gap in certain other areas of content? But if you go ask the newspapers, they still write about the same things. You know, I get on an airplane, I pick up 3 newspapers at the door. By the time I have read my first newspaper and half of the second, I feel like I'm reading the first newspaper. Right? So there's clearly an over-commoditization of content in that area. So the question is, what is your true value as a newspaper? And if I go to a newspaper website, they used to produce a newspaper which had weather, which had the television programming, a bit of critics on television, it had a bit of international news, and a lot of local news. If I go to the web and read their newspaper, and I want to read international news, I can actually read a newspaper in China or in India in English, get more international news than I can get from the one page of the Times in the UK. So the question is the Times value proposition in the UK on the web actually an international proposition, or is it a British proposition? So the point I'm trying to make is that it is very important to rethink in the online world, you know, what is your core competence? What are you doing which is better and different from other people around you, as opposed to what are you doing just because you've been doing it for the last 10, 15, 20 years, right? Second one is, I think it's very important to challenge the rules. It is very important to go back and think, what is it that we need to do differently? I took the example of newspapers. Now, there is a principle, we have to do everything ourselves. You know, our true value is editorial. But if you look at the content, there is tremendous amount of overlap of content and tremendous amounts of commoditization of content. The Guardian in the UK has actually said that the current printing presses they have bought are going to be the last printing presses they will ever buy. So their press will last about 25 years. So there's a probability, they think that in 30 years they won't need printing presses. That's a bit hard to believe, right? Can you guys believe a world where we may not have a newspaper? I don't know, it may or may not happen. But if you play this back, you know, I moved to the UK 9 years ago. And I moved from the US, and I had just bought myself 2 new VCRs. You guys remember those things? VCRs, right? I had bought 2 new VCRs, and I moved to the UK, and I plugged one in, and it blew. I didn't know that the frequency is different and the power is different, so I plugged it in and went boom. I was smart. I did not try that with the second one. I decided to go buy a VCR. So I went to this electronics store, and the guy who was probably incentivized to sell DVD players more than he was to sell VCRs told me VCRs are history, buy a DVD player. I said, okay, I'll buy a DVD player. That was about 9 years ago. I bought a DVD player. I went to my local video store, and they had this big store called Primetime Video, and there was a corner with one rack which had DVDs. And the only DVD you could rent was a classic DVD, because they felt that classics will always be in fashion, people will watch them, but you can't buy the new ones because there is not enough demand. Now I go there 9 years later to my local DVD store, not my video store. I think some of the people who give me the DVDs don't remember or don't know what a VCR was. They're about 17 or 18. I don't think they know what a VCR was. That was only 9 years ago. And if I had come to you and said 9 years ago, can you imagine a world where there would be no VCRs? And people in the audience said, well, Nikesh, you know, there will always be about 30-40% people in the world who will have VCRs. How many of you have a SLR camera? Remember the ones where you put the reel and you put it around the other side and you take pictures? Remember that one? How many of you have one? How many of them have been used in the last week or 2 weeks? I won't ask how many of you have digital cameras. You probably have more than one in your phone as well, right? Do you remember a world when digital cameras came about and people said, oh, this is funny. They want to take a picture and then they want to keep it on their computer and not go to a photo store and actually print it and use it and watch it? I think we take probably... I was driving up in the car from the hotel, and I took out my BlackBerry and took a picture because I saw a big ad of a Google phone. I said, I have to take a picture of this. I could never do that. I would never carry a SLR camera with a film and then put it in there, take a picture, go get it developed, get it scanned and send to my colleagues. Not likely. So I'm taking 4 to 8 times more pictures than I ever did. Right? We all are. Again, it's very hard to think about the world 10 years out and say things are going to vanish. Our tendency is we always overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. We always do that. You always think that a lot more is possible in the next 1 year than it is, and you always think most of these things won't change in 10 years, and they do. It actually happens on my objectives. When my boss asks me, what will you do in the next 1 year? I give him long lists of what I can do, and then I never do them, but I think in 10 years I will get them done. So anyway, my point is, it's very important to question every assumption, especially in the current environment, if you are a media business, if you are a print business, because things are going to change tremendously because of the internet in the next 8 to 10 years. And that applies to newspapers, it applies to agencies, right? Until you can't launch a new product without television. It's possible. Google launches a product every few months. We don't do any advertising. Larry Page's view is, if you can engage consumers, if you can make it usable, if you make the best product in the world, people will come up and take it. People will enjoy it. Now again, there are extreme views. I used to work in marketing before this, and I understand there are some products which do require some degree of support. But the point I'm trying to make is, this is the time to go back and rethink about what are the core competencies that you have to offer, what is it that some of the fundamental rules are, whether you're an advertiser, a print media owner, whether you're an agency, in terms of what you believe, assumptions. This is one which I think will make or break the agency business in the next 10 years. I think we've lived in a world where it became very clear how you use television, how you use print. We were able to split the functions and have creative businesses and media buying businesses. I think going forward, it is going to be impossible to maintain that distinction, because you have to think about what's the best campaign on YouTube, what's the best campaign on Facebook, what's the best campaign on Google. We're not standard media. Google is not equal to YouTube, is not equal to MySpace, is not equal to Facebook. We're not the same property like a television broadcasting channel. So you actually have to think about the media you're buying and design the campaign around the media, as opposed to say, hey, you buy the media, I'll design the campaign. And the risk we run is, if we do not bring these two parts together, especially in the phase where we're rebuilding the world of advertising, we run the risk that you will have disconnections between the two. So I think the future, in the future going forward, digital businesses have to have both the media and the creative side together. Also, it's very important not to have a separate internet team compared to the rest of your creative team, because you have to create the link between all the different cross-medias that you're actually working with. Same thing applies to newspaper owners, television owners, right? The BBC, I think, is one of the better examples of a cross-media platform. You can actually go to their website, find print, you can watch them on television, you can have BBC radio, and they're actually learning how to bring all the different content together in different forms. It's very hard for traditional businesses which have only been newspapers or only been television channels. So what I'm noticing is TV companies are hiring print journalists to write on their website. I'm noticing newspapers are hiring 1 or 2 people with video cameras to put videos on their website. So what's interesting is you're beginning to see very, very traditional siloed media people trying to go into the other parts. And I think this is an interesting time. The question is, how do you get all kinds of content into your business? So again, you will see this happen more, and you'll see more and more of a cross-media strategy as content creation is concerned. And last but not the least, there always is the question, how are you going to make money? And we have this big spectrum. In life, content has either been paid for by subscription or by advertising, or a mix of the two. Whether it's the magazine you buy, you pay for subscription. Whether it's the television movie you buy in your hotel room, that's subscription. Or you watch a free movie and there's lots of ads in the middle of it. That's how we've always monetized content around the world. Now on the internet, it's your choice. You can have 100,000 users and ask them for subscription. You can have 10 million users and ask them to be supported by advertising. The problem, I think, in most internet businesses is people still think geographically. People still think this is a Polish website, or this is a UK website, this is a German website. The problem is you've got 1.4 billion people. If you will automatically create these constraints, saying these are just for my country, you run the risk that you have limited the size of your audience, and therefore you cannot monetize the advertising or spread the cost across the entire internet base. So again, my recommendation is, don't think about just monetizing on a national basis. Don't think about monetizing on a subscription basis. Think about this as a platform of 1.4 billion people that is going to give us tremendous opportunity. And I will end by saying, relating back to the previous speaker who talked about the crisis, crises are wonderful times in a way because they create scarcity. And scarcity is phenomenal because it breeds clarity. When you have scarcity, then you start worrying about how to best optimize your resources, and you don't do wasteful things. So, interestingly, if you go back, and the other point he made was around innovation, if you go back and think, many successful companies were created in the moments of economic crisis. Google was started in 1999, which was the last crisis in the United States. Apple was started in a crisis, Hewlett-Packard was started in a crisis, Microsoft was started in a crisis. So perhaps this crisis will give birth to many more Googles and create tremendous amounts of clarity because of the scarcity. With that, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Or, no,
We can ask if there's any questions from the public.